Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something fascinating, a real contradiction right at the heart of modern gaming history. We're looking at Braid, the 2008 indie puzzle platformer.
That's right.
And our mission, our deep dive here, is to try and square this circle. How can a game with such massive critical acclaim, such a groundbreaking legacy, now face this growing feeling that it's, well, aged poorly? That for a lot of players today, it's just a slog.
It's a huge tension, isn't it? Because Braid wasn't just, a good game. It was monumental back then.
Absolutely.
We're talking Metacritic 93 out of 100. For a time, it was the highest rated game on Xbox Live Arcade. People called it the sex, lies, and videotape of indie gaming. It basically validated indie games as art for a lot of people.
But that's the thing. The irony now is almost, palpable. 16 years later, you've got new players, maybe patient gamers, picking it up and saying, hang on, this is tedious.
Yeah, boring, structurally flawed.
How does that happen? A game that arguably launched an entire movement made by Jonathan Blow, one of gaming's most, let's say, intense philosophical minds. How does it end up dismissed like that?
That's exactly what we need to unpack. We're going to go through the source material, peel back the layers. You've got the famous time mechanics, the creator's really rigorous design philosophy.
And then there's the hidden stuff, right? The controversial narrative about control, obsession, even the atomic bomb.
Exactly. And we need to figure out, does the undeniable genius in those core ideas actually justify the frustration people feel, just playing the game moment to moment?
Okay, let's get into it. Let's start with part one, the dual identity, a puzzling legacy of praise and critique. And I think we have to begin with just how big this thing was initially. You need that context for the later criticism to land.
Oh, absolutely. The stakes back in 2008 for indie developers were, they were huge. Braid was the proof. It showed independent digital distribution could work, big time.
It wasn't just critics loving it, it hit financially too. That easy writer moment comparison feels right, proving you didn't need a giant publisher backing you.
And Jonathan Blow really walked the walk. He funded it himself, right? Yeah. 3 years of development.
Yeah, about $200,000 of his own cash, apparently.
Totally.
Which is a huge gamble.
Massive. But the payoff, legendary. By 2014, it had pulled in over $4 million in revenue.
$4 million, wow.
And that money didn't just disappear. He famously used it to fund his next big, ambitious puzzle game, The Witness.
Right.
But beyond that, Braid really laid down the blueprint. It showed other indie devs like the teams behind Limbo or Super Meat Boy that self-publishing success was possible. It genuinely opened doors.
It put indie games on the map for a much wider audience, didn't it? Made people take notice.
Definitely. It encouraged a whole wave of creators. Think about studios like Supergiant Games, the Bastion and Hades folks.
Yeah.
Braid helped build that foundation. The idea that small teams could make something deeply personal, high quality, and actually profitable too.
Okay, so that's the monumental legacy. Now let's bring in the tension, the counter-argument. Because once the indie scene exploded, once you had tons of high-quality indie games flooding the market,
the standard just shot up, as our sources put it.
Yeah.
And suddenly people started looking back at the ancestor, at Braid, with sharper eyes.
And this is where the patient gamers come in, people playing it years later, maybe without all the initial hype clouding their judgment. They're judging it purely on mechanics against what they expect from indie games now.
And the verdict can be pretty brittle. Honestly, just boring. A slog.
So what makes it a slog? Where does that feeling come from?
It seemed to boil down to pacing and maybe friction. The main character, Tim, apparently moves insanely slow.
Which on platformers is usually not ideal.
Right, it creates immediate frustration. But it gets worse because of the time mechanic itself. Okay, rewinding time is instant. Cool.
Yeah.
But lots of the puzzles force you to use other mechanics, like the ring that slows time down to an absolute crawl.
Or you have to wait around for your shadow clone to repeat a long sequence of actions you just did.
Exactly. All that waiting. It's enforced waiting, which makes solving a puzzle feel less like a triumphant aha moment and more like, a chore. You figured it out. Now you just have to sit there while the game executes it slowly.
It feels passive.
Passive, yeah. And that leads straight into this other critique, that the puzzles feel less like genuine intellectual discovery and more like just discovering a gimmick.
Like you're not figuring out a clever system, you're just stumbling on some weird, unexplained feature the designer threw in.
Precisely. That feeling of imposition. Like the game isn't playing fair with its rules or isn't explaining them well enough.
Yeah.
And modern players used to really polished, refined indie experiences They just don't have patience for that kind of friction.
And some people argue those issues, the slowness, the waiting, they were always there, right?
That's the argument, that the sheer novelty of the time stuff and the deep story blinded critics back in 2008. They overlooked the mechanical clunkiness because the ideas were so powerful.
And it wasn't just the gameplay getting reevaluated. The look and sound, too.
Yeah. The aesthetics are surprisingly divisive now. Visually, people still seem to like the backgrounds. David Hellman's paintings, very impressionistic, beautiful.
Okay.
But the foreground stuff, Tim himself, the enemy, the actual platforms you jump on, people now are calling them tacky, even ugly.
Really? Ugly?
Yeah. That sort of cartoony style, some find it clashes really badly with the serious, heavy themes the narrative is trying to explore.
And the music, I remember that being a big deal. Using licensed tracks from artists like Jamie Sieber, that felt quite revolutionary for an indie game back then.
It absolutely was. But again, friction. Because the music is tied directly to the rewind mechanic.
So you're constantly hearing it play backwards.
Constantly. And while the tracks might be lovely forwards, hearing them mangled and reversed over and over, some players found it just grated.
But was that intentional? Was the grating sound part of the design?
Apparently, yes. Blow specifically picked long tracks so they wouldn't loop annoyingly if you got stuck. And he deliberately wanted music that sounded different and interesting when reversed to match the gameplay. The weird, unsettling quality of the reversed music was, arguably, purposeful disruption, part of the experience.
Okay, so we've got a game that's potentially slow, visually jarring for some, maybe even audibly annoying, yet it's hailed as this untouchable masterpiece, which leads us to the core question. What did those original critics see that maybe modern players are missing, or just rejecting? Let's move to part 2, the core gameplay. Innovation or imposition. Let's dig into those mechanics and the philosophy behind them.
Right, because at its absolute core, Braid is doing something profound with game mechanics. It's deconstruction.
How so?
Well, take the most basic thing. Unlimited time reversal. You press a button, time goes back. Instantly. Most games use time powers for combat or tricky jumps, right?
Yeah, like Prince of Persia or Time Shift.
Exactly. But Blow uses it, first and foremost, to completely remove the consequence of death. You literally cannot fail a jump. You can't die permanently.
So it takes the platforming skill element almost entirely out of the equation.
Precisely. By making death meaningless, it forces you, the player, to stop worrying about timing jumps perfectly and focus purely on the puzzle, the intellectual challenge. In Braid, manipulating time is the puzzle, not just a tool you use occasionally.
And each world introduces a totally new twist on that.
Completely new rules about time. It systematically builds this incredible complexity, and each new rule challenges your fundamental understanding of how time and causality work in this specific universe.
Okay, let's break down some of those rules because they really show the ambition. World 3, time and mystery.
Right. This introduces objects that glow green. And the key thing, these green objects are immune to time reversal.
So if you trigger one, like flip a switch.
It stays flipped. Even if you rewind, everything goes back 10 minutes. It's permanent.
So the puzzles become about syncing things that can be rewound with things that can't.
Exactly. You're suddenly juggling two different timelines, essentially. One you can erase, one whose history is fixed. It forces you to think about time in a much more complex way than just a single linear stream.
Okay, that's clever. Then World 4, time and place. This one sounds wild.
This is where time itself is tied to Tim's movement. You move right, time flows forward. You move left, time flows backward.
Wait, seriously, what happens if you stand still or jump?
Time pauses. It completely messes with your platforming instincts. Every single movement decision is also a temporal manipulation decision.
That sounds brain melting. Does that risk just frustrating players who want to, jump around? It sounds like a huge cognitive load.
It absolutely risks it. And that's kind of the point, I think. Blow wasn't interested in just letting you run on instinct. He wanted to force critical thought.
And there's that famous level in this world, right? The Donkey Kong homage.
The Jumpman level, yeah. It takes that super familiar arcade layout, climbing ladders, avoiding barrels, and applies this time moves with you rule. It completely subverts it, twists it into something mind-bending. It's a perfect example of deconstructing a gaming classic.
Okay, and then it gets even more complex in World 5, time and decision, the shadow mechanic.
Oh yeah, the shadow. So in this world, when you rewind time, a shadow version of Tim appears and perfectly repeats all the actions you just rewound.
So you can effectively have two Tims acting at once.
In parallel, yes. You might perform an action, rewind, and then your shadow repeats that action while your real Tim does something else simultaneously. Maybe the shadow holds a switch down while you run through the door it opened.
That enables some seriously complex puzzle setups.
Absolutely. And even the art style in this world hints at it, apparently using this weird mix of luxurious domestic objects and rugged outdoor objects all jumbled together, symbolizing these merging alternate realities created by your decisions and rewinds.
And the final mechanical twist is World 1, the last main area where time itself is just broken.
Yeah, in World 1, time flows backwards by default. The only way to make time move forward is to actively use your rewind ability.
Wow, so the core mechanic is flipped entirely on its head.
It completely recontextualizes everything you've learned about movement and time in the game up to that point.
Okay, so you've got these incredibly intricate, evolving rules. This brings us to the philosophy behind it all. What was Blow actually trying to do with these mechanics?
This is the crucial bit that those early critics really keyed into. Blow talked about his design process as being like discovery through programming. Meaning he felt less like he was inventing arbitrary puzzles and more like he was discovering interesting phenomena that emerged naturally from the unique rules of time he had coded into the game's universe. He even said the game, in a way, designed itself.
So the puzzles aren't just random brain teasers, they're demonstrations.
Exactly. Each puzzle is meant to be an illustration of some interesting fact about how Braid's specific reality works. When you solve it, you're not just finding a solution, you're effectively saying to the game, okay, I understand this principle. I get how causality or permanence works here.
That's a really high-minded approach to puzzle design. It demands a lot from the player.
It does, and he doubled down on that by discouraging walkthroughs. He famously said, unearned rewards are false and meaningless. He wanted you to have that genuine aha moment through your own effort.
So the original critics, they weren't just praising clever mechanics, they were praising the intellectual rigor behind it, the commitment to this pure form of discovery.
I think that's exactly right. They saw the brilliance of the system. Even if the moment-to-moment gameplay felt slow or fiddly, the intellectual payoff, that moment of deep understanding, was what they were rewarding. They were rating the game on its ideas, its density, maybe more than its immediate responsiveness.
But it wasn't just about the mechanics, was it? There's this whole other layer, this incredibly deep, controversial narrative that apparently most people miss entirely, which raises the stakes even higher. Let's get into part 3. The secret narrative. The stakes of obsession and control.
Right. Because on the surface, the story seems almost cliche, right? Tim's looking for a princess who's been snatched by a horrible and evil monster.
Standard stuff.
Yeah, the little text snippets you find talk about forgiveness, desire, frustration. Very typical themes. It even uses that Super Mario thing at the end of Worlds. The princess is in another castle.
So it sets you up expecting a classic Reckless story.
Completely. Which makes the twist in the final level, World 1, so effective. Remember, time runs backwards there.
Right.
So as you play through it normally, meaning moving right, which makes time go backward, it looks like Tim is helping the princess escape from a night. They're working together. But then, when the level ends, time snaps back to flowing forwards, and you watch the actual sequence of events unfold, and you realize Tim wasn't helping her. He was the monster pursuing her all along. She was running from him, and the knight was actually rescuing her from Tim.
Whoa, so the game completely flips your understanding of the protagonist and your own actions right at the very end.
Totally undermines it, forces you to question everything about Tim's motivations, and by extension, your own as the player controlling him. It's a powerful reversal, but it gets deeper.
Deeper than finding out you're the bad guy.
Oh yeah. According to the sources, there's this whole hidden layer, an allegory, that you only really piece together by finding secret text passages in the epilogue.
And this is where the bomb stuff comes in.
This is the big one, the most popular interpretation anyway. The princess isn't a person. She represents the atomic bomb.
Yay, bomb. Seriously.
And Tim. He's a stand-in for a driven, perhaps obsessed, nuclear scientist involved in its creation. Like someone from the Manhattan Project.
Okay, that sounds like a massive leap from a cartoony platformer. Is there actual evidence for that in the game?
Surprisingly specific evidence, yeah. These hidden epilogue texts contain direct historical quotes. One passage apparently quotes someone describing the Trinity test, the first A-bomb detonation. On that moment hung eternity, time stood still. Stuff like that.
Wow, okay.
Another passage supposedly quotes Kenneth Bainbridge's famous, chilling line right after the successful test. Now we are all sons of bitches.
That's incredibly specific and dark.
Right. The narrative uses these historical anchors to paint Tim as this brilliant man, consumed by this obsessive quest for creation, this hunger to find her, to bring this immense power into being.
And there are visual clues, too, something about flags.
Yeah, apparently the castles in the game display these nautical signal flags.
Yeah.
NULXK. And if you look at what those mean in the maritime warning system.
What do they say?
Things like stop instantly and you are approaching danger. Direct warnings seemingly aimed right at Tim, or the player, about this obsessive pursuit of, well, indescribable power.
And the ultimate consequence for achieving the hardest goal in the game reflects this. Finding all the hidden stars.
That seems to be the final, brutal statement. If you manage to collect all 8 hidden stars, the ultimate completionist challenge, and then you finally reach the princess, she explodes when Tim touches her.
Oh my god.
A catastrophic, irreversible event. Symbolizing the bomb, the destructive power unleashed, the one thing that, unlike everything else in Braid, absolutely can't be reversed. It's a profoundly tragic statement about obsession and the potential cost of knowledge.
But Blow himself didn't want just one single interpretation, did he? He wanted ambiguity.
He definitely pushed back against simplistic readings. The sources say he intended the story to be complex, subtle, not easily boiled down. He talked about the game being about the journey, not the destination.
And he got frustrated with how critics talked about it.
Deeply frustrated, it seems. He felt critics were using the game to look smart, to promote themselves, rather than really grappling with the density of ideas he felt he'd woven in. He compared his ambition to incredibly dense literature, like Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow. He felt the subtlety was just being missed.
I mean, okay, but can I push back on that a little? If you hide your most profound message, the atomic bomb allegory, behind secret texts, optional collectibles, obscure historical quotes, aren't you kind of setting it up to be missed? Doesn't that risk prioritizing the designer's cleverness over actually communicating with the audience, especially in a game that looks like, well, Braid?
That is exactly the tightrope the game walks. That's the core tension. For Blow, that rigor, that demand for player effort was part of the artistic integrity. He didn't want to just hand you the story. He wanted you to feel the weight of discovery. If you weren't willing to dig, maybe you hadn't earned the right to understand the deepest layers. He seemed to be designing for posterity, not for easy consumption.
That intense philosophy, that tension between high art and maybe accessibility. It leads perfectly into our next section, Part 4. The price of artistry and the state of indie. Because Braid was the catalyst, but it seems like Blow's whole philosophy ended up clashing pretty hard with the industry it helped create.
Absolutely. There's no denying Braid provided that crucial proof of concept. It showed indie games could be commercially huge without a publisher, legitimizing platforms like Xbox Live Arcade and Steam for innovative personal work. It really did pave the way for that indie boom after 2010.
But Blow himself seemed pretty critical of where that indie community went afterwards, didn't he?
He had some sharp words, yeah. He felt the focus shifted too much towards accessibility, towards this idea that everybody can express themselves through making games.
Which sounds nice on the surface.
Right. But Blow argued it often ignored the sheer difficulty of making a truly good game. He championed craftsmanship, rigor, trying to make the absolute best thing, even if it wasn't trendy or easy to play. He basically said making great games is really hard, and just celebrating self-expression can lead to praising mediocrity over genuine craft.
So he felt the scene he helped launch got maybe a bit soft, too focused on participation trophies instead of deep, challenging work.
That's certainly one interpretation of his comments, and he was very clear about the financial side of that philosophy too. He essentially said that if you want true creative freedom, if you're going to ignore commercial pressures and design choices that guarantee sales,
then you have to accept that maybe nobody might play this.
Exactly. You give up the right to expect financial success if you prioritize pure artistic vision above all else.
And this whole conflict, the high-minded artist versus the messy reality of the market, it got perfectly captured in that infamous Soulja Boy incident, right?
Oh, yes. Indie Game, the movie. There's this incredibly dramatic sequence cutting between Blow talking agonizingly about his artistic struggles, the philosophy, the sleepless nights.
And then it cuts to
rapper Soulja Boy streaming Braid and just completely dismissing it. Stupid as hell, man. Or something like that.
The movie frames it as this really tragic moment, doesn't it? The misunderstood genius rejected by the ignorant masses.
Yeah, but looking back, a lot of people found it, hilarious. It kind of highlighted what some saw as Blow's holier-than-thou attitude at the time.
Yeah.
Especially since the game had already made millions. It felt A bit like, come, man.
It was that perfect, awkward collision of high art pretensions and just blunt, unfiltered consumer reaction.
Exactly. And it really speaks to that core tension.
Yeah.
Now, what happens when your deeply serious philosophical creation just bounces off someone, or they just don't care about your intent?
And unfortunately, that tension, that clash between artistic ambition and market reality, it seems to have had a really harsh final act just recently, the Braid Anniversary Edition.
Yeah. This definitive version, updated visuals, better sound, 40 brand new levels, hours of developer commentary. It landed in May 2024.
And it was a huge commercial disappointment.
How bad?
Jonathan Blow himself confirmed it on a live stream in July 2024. His words were pretty blunt. It sold like dog shit.
Wow.
Yeah. Missed sales targets by such a massive amount that his studio, Thekla Inc., the one funded by Braid's success and that made The Witness, was apparently facing serious financial problems because of it.
That is just inescapable irony, isn't it? The game that launched the indie boon, hailed as a timeless masterpiece, generates millions. And then the fancy, polished, definitive anniversary edition struggles to sell 16 years later.
It's brutal. It just hammers home how volatile this industry is, how quickly things change. Even for established, revered games and creators, nothing is guaranteed.
The original game let you rewind mistakes, erase consequences, but this was a consequence you couldn't rewind.
A financial reality check that time manipulation couldn't fix. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Braid. It's this incredibly fascinating artifact, isn't it? Caught forever between being this masterpiece of deep, rigorous design and, well, for a growing number of people, a relic. A tedious game from a simpler time in indie development.
It's got this dense, powerful argument about obsession and catastrophe hidden inside a puzzle game that mechanically many now find just too slow, too frustrating.
But the genius seems to lie less in the jumping and more in the ideas. The commitment to making you feel that aha moment, that pure discovery of the rules. It dared to be different, to reject norms.
Absolutely, its ambition was undeniable.
But then you look at the final chapter, the source material's conclusion. The man who poured his savings into making this philosophical statement, who chafed at simplistic interpretations, watches his updated masterpiece fail commercially 16 years on.
It shows someone who clearly values enduring ideas over market trends, yet keeps getting pulled back to earth by the financial realities. That irony just hangs over the game's entire legacy now.
Which leaves us with maybe one final thought to chew on. Braid was meticulously designed to mess with your assumptions about time, about narrative, about how games should work. If the creator's goal was this timeless piece of art, could it be that the game's ultimate unresolvable puzzle wasn't in the levels themselves, but in this constant, enduring clash between that high artistic ambition and the harsh, unforgiving, ever-changing reality of the market?